The day my daughter called to tell me her mother was engaged, I was sitting on a bench outside a cafe in Lisbon, watching pigeons fight over a piece of bread. I remember thinking, even the pigeons here are calmer than my life used to be. That was 14 months after I signed the divorce papers. 14 months after I packed 2 suitcases, booked a one-way ticket, and left the house I'd spent 26 years building into something I thought was a home. 14 months after my wife of 3 decades looked me in the eye and said she hadn't been happy in years. That I had never understood her. That she needed to find herself. I was 62 years old and I had to figure out what that meant. Her name was Diane. We met in Atlanta in 1991 at a mutual friend's cookout. She was wearing a yellow sundress and laughing at something her cousin said. I didn't even hear the joke, I just heard the laugh. We were married 2 years later. Had our daughter, Savannah, in 1995. Her brother, Tobias, came along in 1998. For a long time, things were good, not perfect. But good the way real life is good, with the boring parts and the hard parts mixed in with the beautiful ones. Then somewhere around 2015, something shifted. I couldn't name it then. I can name it now. She started working with a man named Roland, a real estate developer who had relocated to Atlanta from Chicago. She said he was a client, then a business partner, then a friend. I noticed she started dressing differently, came home later, laughed at things on her phone she never showed me. I asked questions the way you do when you already know something is wrong, but you're not ready to hear the answer. She said I was paranoid, that I was projecting insecurity, that I had always been suspicious of her friendships. I believed her, or I told myself I did. I kept working. I was a civil engineer, mid-level management at a firm in Buckhead. Not glamorous, not rich, but honest work, steady income, good benefits. We had a house in Decatur, a joint investment account, and what I thought was a shared life. Tobias was finishing his master's at Georgia Tech. Savannah was living in Nashville working in marketing. They were grown. We were supposed to be moving into the next chapter together. Instead, she asked for a divorce in March of 2022. She said she'd grown, that she wanted more, that she and I wanted different things at this stage of life. She said it calmly, like she'd rehearsed it, like she'd been holding on to those words for months. I sat across the kitchen table from her and I felt the floor drop out from under me. I didn't yell, I didn't beg. I asked if there was someone else. She said no. I asked again 3 weeks later when I found a receipt from a restaurant in Midtown. 2 glasses of wine, 2 entrees, a dessert. On a Tuesday night, she told me she was working late. She said I was making something out of nothing. We spent 4 months going back and forth through attorneys. She wanted the house. She wanted half of the investment account. She wanted a share of my pension, which, under Georgia law, was on the table. I was so exhausted and so broken I almost let her have all of it. My attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia, a woman I'll call Patricia, talked me off that ledge twice. I got a fair settlement in the end, less than I deserved, but more than I feared. I signed the papers in July, and by September I was on a plane to Lisbon. Why Lisbon? My college roommate had retired there 2 years before and kept sending me photos of cobblestone streets and grilled fish and the kind of light that makes everything look like it's in a painting. I called him one evening after a particularly bad night of sitting alone in a rental apartment in Decatur eating microwave soup, and he said, "Man, stop punishing yourself. Come see what you've been missing." I came for 3 weeks. I stayed. The cost of living, let me be honest about this because people always ask, is about a third of what I was spending in Atlanta. My rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in the Alfama district was $1,100 a month. A dinner out was $12–15. The health care was manageable, especially with my supplemental insurance. My pension and investment income, once I made peace with what the divorce had taken, was enough to live comfortably. Not extravagantly, but I could walk to a market, buy fresh produce, sit at a cafe, and feel like a human being again. That's what I needed, to feel like a human being again. I was 6 months into this new life when Savannah called. She said it carefully, the way she always delivered news she knew I wouldn't like. She started with how she'd been doing, asked about Lisbon, mentioned Tobias was busy with work. Then she said, "Dad, I have to tell you something. Mom is seeing Roland. They're engaged." I looked out my apartment window at the river, the Tagus, wide and golden in the late afternoon. I said, "I know." And I did know. I'd known for a long time, but knowing something and hearing it confirmed our two different kinds of pain. Savannah sounded relieved that I wasn't falling apart. She said she didn't know how to feel about it, that she liked Roland okay, but that it felt strange. Fast. She said Tobias seemed fine with it. He and Roland had apparently hit it off. I asked if she was okay. She said she was. She asked if I was. I told her the honest truth. I was getting there. What she told me next, almost as an afterthought, was the thing that sat with me for weeks. She said that at the engagement dinner, a small gathering at a restaurant in Buckhead, about 20 people, Tobias had stood up and made a little speech. He'd talked about Roland's success, his ambition, his real estate portfolio. He'd called Roland the role model, called him a self-made man who knew how to take care of the people he loved. Then he said, and Savannah said she'd gone still when she heard it, he's everything a man should be. Everything you want in a father figure. He was talking to his mother, but everyone in the room knew who he was comparing Roland to. Everyone. Savannah said some people laughed politely. Some looked at their plates. She said she excused herself to the restroom and sat on the floor of the stall for 10 minutes, breathing. I held the phone for a while after she told me. Outside, someone on the street below was playing guitar. A slow, aching fado song, the kind they play in Lisbon that sounds like it was written specifically for whatever grief you're carrying that day. I didn't cry. I was past the crying phase, but something hardened in me a little, and something else, I don't know how to describe it, quietly let go. I had spent 30 years being a father. Not a perfect one, but a present one. I coached Tobias's Little League team for 4 years. I drove him to SAT prep at 6 in the morning on Saturdays. I helped him move twice. I flew to his thesis defense. When he went through a rough patch in his mid-20s, lost a job, a relationship ended badly, he was in a dark place. I was the one who flew home from a conference early to sit with him. And now I was being measured against a man he'd known for 18 months, found lacking by my own son at a dinner table I wasn't even invited to. That took me a long time to put somewhere inside myself. The months that followed were strange. Tobias called occasionally, short calls, surface level. He told me about Roland's new development project in Gwinnett County. He told me Roland was taking the family to the Bahamas for Christmas. He said Mom seemed happier than she'd been in a long time. I listened. I said the right things. I did not say what I was thinking. What I was thinking was, your mother was happy, plenty of times. You just don't remember because you were young, and because the story she's been telling you for the last few years has overwritten the earlier one. I didn't say that. Some things you hold. Savannah came to visit in November. She stayed for 10 days. I showed her the city, the tile museum, the time out market, the viewpoints they call miraduros, where you can see the whole spread of the city laid out below you. We ate pastéis de nata every morning. She cried one afternoon on a bench in the Alfama and said she missed how things used to be when we were all just a family. I held her hand and told her the truth. Some things end. It doesn't mean they didn't matter. The wedding was set for late April. Roland apparently moved fast. Everything about him moved fast, from what I gathered. They booked a venue in Buckhead, sent out invitations, hired a planner. The whole thing came together in about 6 months. Tobias was the best man. I found out through Savannah, not through Tobias. He didn't call to tell me. I don't know if he thought it would hurt me, which it did, or if he just didn't think about it at all. I leaned toward the latter. At 34, Tobias had always been a little like that. He loved hard, but he didn't always look left and right before he moved. I wasn't invited. I hadn't expected to be. But I thought maybe Tobias would call and say something. Acknowledge it somehow. He didn't. The day of the wedding, I took a long walk along the waterfront. I walked for almost 2 hours. I thought about the man I'd been at 34, nervous and hopeful at my own wedding, squeezing Diane's hand at the altar. I thought about what I'd wanted for my kids. Not wealth, not a perfect life, just the ability to see clearly, to know what's real. I went home, made dinner, watched a documentary about the Azores, and went to bed. Savannah texted me around 10 p.m. her time. She said the wedding's beautiful. She said the venue was stunning and the food was good. She said Roland's family was warm and welcoming. She seemed like she was trying. Then she sent a second message a little while later. She said, "Something happened at the reception. I'll call you tomorrow. Mom's okay, but it was a lot." I put the phone down and slept. She called the next morning, early her time. The story came out in pieces. At the reception, during cocktail hour, one of Roland's former business associates, a man named Whitfield, someone nobody in our family knew, had pulled aside one of Diane's close friends from their church group. He'd been drinking, and he started talking. He said Roland had a reputation in certain circles in Chicago, and now in Atlanta, for what he called creative partnership agreements. He described a pattern. Roland would get involved with someone, romantically, professionally, or both, charm them, build trust, get access to their finances or their assets, and then restructure things quietly in his favor. He'd done it with 2 business partners up north. There had been a lawsuit, settled out of court, nothing public, nothing on a Google search. Whitfield had tried to warn people before. He said he never knew how to do it without looking like a jealous ex-associate, but he'd had too much champagne, and the words came out at a wedding reception in a country club in Buckhead. Diane's friend from church, a no-nonsense woman named Sister Beaumont, who everyone called Sister Beaumont, who everyone called Sister B, heard every word. She waited until after dinner. Then she went and found Diane. Savannah wasn't in the room when it happened, but she was standing nearby in the hallway when Diane came out to use the powder room and nearly walked into a wall. She said her mother's face was completely drained of color, that she was gripping her clutch purse like it was the only solid thing in the room, that she didn't cry. She just stood there in the hallway with this look Savannah had never seen on her before. Then she straightened up, went back in, and got through the rest of her own wedding reception. I thought about that a long time. The composure it takes to do that. I won't pretend I don't know Diane. I won't pretend there isn't still something in me that is sad for her. 30 years is 30 years. You don't erase that, even when you should be angrier than you are. The weeks after the wedding were complicated. Savannah started doing some digging on her own. She's thorough, always has been. She pulled public records. She looked at the property filings Roland had in Georgia. What she found wasn't a smoking gun exactly, but it was a pattern of things that raised questions. Properties held in LLCs that didn't include Diane's name, despite what she'd apparently been told about their shared investment structure. A transfer of a piece of land in Fayette County that had happened the week after the wedding moved to one of his holding companies. She brought what she found to Diane. This is the part of the story I'll be careful with, because it's still playing out. What I'll say is this. Diane's attorney got involved. A financial forensics professional was brought in. Roland became very quiet very fast. There was a tense few months that I watched from across an ocean, through phone calls with Savannah, not interfering but staying close. In the middle of all this, Tobias called me. I hadn't heard from him in almost 2 months. It was a Tuesday morning my time. The phone rang and it was him, and I answered the way I always answer when he calls. Like no time has passed. Like I'm not keeping a quiet count of the days. He didn't say hello. He said, "Dad, I owe you an apology." I sat down. He said he was sorry for the speech at the engagement dinner. He said he knew it had gotten back to me. He said he'd been caught up in something, a feeling he couldn't fully explain, and that he'd said something he shouldn't have, and that it wasn't fair. I listened. He said Roland had seemed like everything he thought a certain kind of man should be. Successful, decisive, the kind of man who walks into a room and takes up space. He said he thought he'd been comparing that to how I'd always been. Steady, quiet, behind the scenes, and reading steadiness as weakness. He said, "I think I had it backwards, Dad." I don't know how long I was quiet. Long enough for him to ask if I was still there. I told him I was there. I told him I'd always been there. I told him I accepted his apology, and I meant it fully, but that I also wanted him to understand something, that the kind of man who shows up quietly, who works and doesn't brag and drives to SAT prep at 6 in the morning and answers the phone when his son is at rock bottom, that kind of man isn't a lesser version of anything. That's just a man who decided his family was more important than his image. He didn't say much after that, but I could hear him breathing, the way he used to breathe as a little boy when he was trying not to cry, slow and deliberate. He said, "I know, Dad, I know." We talked for about an hour. The most honest conversation we'd had in years. He told me things about himself I didn't know. I told him things about the divorce I'd never said out loud. By the end of it, I was walking slow circles around my kitchen the way I do when a phone call requires both my whole body and all my stillness at once. He asked if he could come visit. I said, of course. My couch folds out into a proper bed and the guest bathroom gets good light in the morning. He came in the fall. He stayed 2 weeks. I showed him the city the way I'd shown Savannah, the viewpoints, the trams, the market on Saturday mornings where you can buy smoked sausage and handmade soap and bootleg DVDs all from the same table. We walked a lot, talked more than we had in years. One evening we sat at a restaurant table overlooking the river. The Tagus turning that burnt orange color it turns at sunset. And he said, "Dad, how'd you do it? How'd you just leave?" I thought about it. I said I hadn't left. I had arrived. There's a difference. When you leave, you're still facing backward. When you arrive somewhere, you're looking at what's in front of you. It took me a while to figure out which direction I was facing. But once I did, it got easier. He nodded slowly. I could tell he was filing that away somewhere. I don't have a tidy conclusion about Diane. Their situation is still being sorted out by attorneys. I don't wish her harm. I did love her, genuinely, for most of 30 years. I hope she comes out of it with her finances intact and her dignity intact. And maybe a harder-won wisdom about the difference between the man who impresses you and a man who will stay. I know that difference now. Learned the hard way. The way most things worth knowing get learned. What I do have, what I'll hold on to, is this. I am 63 years old. I live in a city where people sit outside until midnight because the weather allows it and the culture encourages it. I have a daughter who flew across an ocean to eat pastries with me. I have a son who called me on a Tuesday morning to say I was right, and who means it, and who is figuring out what kind of man he wants to be. I have a pension, a good doctor, and a cafe 2 blocks from my apartment where the owner knows my order and asks about my family. Some mornings I wake up early before the city gets going, and I sit by the window with my coffee and watch the light come across the rooftops. And I think about the version of me who almost gave all of this up, who nearly buried himself in grief over a marriage that had already been over for years, in a house that had already been sold. I think what a loss that would have been. Not every story ends with justice handed down by a judge or a courtroom. Sometimes justice is quieter than that. Sometimes it's your son on the phone saying he had it backwards. Sometimes it's pigeons on a bench. Sometimes it's the light on the Tagus at 5 in the morning and the knowledge that you survived something and came out the other side and are improbably, gratefully, completely still here. There's a version of this story where I become bitter, where I replay Tobias's speech at that engagement dinner on a loop. Everything a father should be, not like you, Dad, and let those words hollow me out from the inside. I know that version of the story. I came close to living it. But here's what I've learned about cause and effect, stripped of everything except what's actually true. The choices we make, quietly, over years. They compound. The same way interest compounds in an account nobody's watching. Roland made choices. Diane made choices. Tobias made choices. I made choices. And eventually, every one of those choices showed up. Not dramatically, not all at once, just they showed up. Roland didn't get exposed because someone set out to catch him. Whitfield had too much champagne and a conscience that had been waiting for the right moment. That's not magic. That's just what happens when a person has been cutting corners long enough. Eventually, the corners don't hold. The character underneath the presentation is the only thing that was ever real, and character, one way or another, reveals itself. I think about what it cost Tobias to make that call on a Tuesday morning. To say out loud, to his father, I had it backwards. That took something from him, some pride, some certainty about the story he'd been telling himself. And I don't take that lightly. That kind of honest reckoning with yourself. At 34 or any age, it's not easy. Most people never do it. They'd rather keep the story comfortable than make it true. What I know is this. I spent 30 years showing up without announcements. I didn't build a real estate portfolio or take anyone to the Bahamas. I drove carpool. I sat in hospital waiting rooms. I answered the phone at 2 in the morning when things fell apart. None of that made headlines at an engagement dinner. But it built something, in Savannah, in Tobias, eventually even in me, that no amount of polished presentation could replicate. There's a kind of strength that doesn't look like strength from the outside. It looks like patience, It looks like showing up when you'd rather disappear. It looks like not saying the cutting thing you have every right to say. That's not weakness. I spent too many years afraid it was. It isn't. It's the hardest thing there is. And there's a kind of wisdom that only comes from paying attention, not just to what people say, but to what they do when they think nobody's watching. Savannah figured that out when she pulled those property records. Tobias figured it out slower, but he figured it out. I'd like to think I modeled something in that. The habit of looking clearly at what's actually in front of you, not just what you want to see. I live in Lisbon now. The light here is honest. It doesn't flatter anything. It just illuminates. Some mornings that's uncomfortable. Most mornings, it's exactly what I need. Tobias is coming back in the spring. Savannah is talking about bringing her boyfriend this time. I bought a second set of coffee cups. That's enough. That's more than enough.